This episode is in English, but I'm usually a French podcast, so I need to explain a little to my regular audience what's happening. So if you don't speak French, feel free to skip the next minute and a half and you'll get right to the good stuff. Une des expressions américaines que je déteste le plus, c'est « Never meet your heroes because you'll end up disappointed ». Ne rencontrez pas vos héros parce que vous allez être déçus. Parce que j'aime pas l'idée qu'on se voile la face de peur de prendre la réalité en pleine poire. Si vos héros sont vraiment bien, ils en sortent grandis. S'ils sont décevants, autant le savoir vite et s'en trouver des meilleurs. C'est donc avec une pointe d'appréhension que j'ai rencontré une de mes principales influences parce que c'est un excellent photographe, mais surtout parce que c'est un excellent créateur qui touche à plein de domaines et partage ce qu'il partage simplement parce qu'il a envie de le faire, comme il parlerait à un pote. On va parler en anglais et c'est pour une bonne raison. Je ne pouvais pas laisser passer la chance d'interviewer Daniel, qui était de passage à Paris et que j'avais prévu de rencontrer, juste parce qu'il ne parle pas français. Et je suis très content d'avoir saisi cette chance, assis sur un banc au pied de la Tour Eiffel. Cet épisode va me coûter plus qu'il ne me rapportera. Je vais perdre des auditeurs francophones qui ne le comprendront pas, et je n'ai rien à gagner du côté des anglophones car ça restera l'exception. Mais il est très intéressant, et au moment de le publier, je me dis qu'il vaut vraiment la peine d'être partagé. On va parler de la photographie comme d'une petite partie d'une grande conversation, du fait que l'argentique est romantisé, de Roger Baleine qui passe l'air de rien devant nous, de curiosité, d'avoir le cerveau en ébullition en permanence, d'avoir désappris la créativité, de tenir un journal, de s'investir dans ses sujets, d'être vraiment unique, de se comprendre soi-même et de la nécessité d'un vrai editing, celui qui réduit non pas à 500 mais à 12 photos.
Vous êtes tout dans l'œil du photographe. Bienvenue dans ce podcast par un photographe sur les photographes pour les photographes. Je suis Julien Pasternak et aujourd'hui, je vous emmène dans l'œil de Daniel Milnor. Hit record.
Guerrilla style recording.
We have 10 hours of recording.
Is that enough for us?
I think, I hope, I sure hope, because I have to get the kids at home.
Don't worry about them. Modern kids are independent. They'll be fine.
They're a little young to be independent, so maybe someday, but not today.
They're French kids, right? So they're sophisticated.
We are not that sophisticated, but
okay.
I try to teach them. I have to be mindful of how I sit because we are filmed today. Hi, Dan.
Hey, how are you?
How are you after a long trip?
I'm in Paris. How could I not be good? Yeah, it's always a blast to come back here.
It's a good place. It's a good place to be. Thank you for agreeing to this. You're in Paris for Blurb, which is a company you work for.
Yes, I'm here for Paris Photo, and we've got a team here. A couple more folks from the U.S., 2 from Europe are coming as well, and it's really the first event post-COVID for us to get into the field as a team. And I've been to Paris Photo many times in the past on my own, but this is the first time for Blurb.
Okay, so it's cool to have you here anyway, because you send a message on I think it was YouTube saying, "Oh, I'm coming. Uncle Dan is coming to Paris. Would you want to do a photo walk?" I say, "Hey, I'm in Paris," and then next thing you know, we are exchanging emails on best places to go and spots to see. And I say, "Hey, would you like to do a podcast with me?" And he said, "Yes."
Yeah, I think you saved us because you saved us from ourselves because of us trying to, and non-French speakers trying to organize a photo walk in France. So you were a huge part of that, and we thank you greatly for helping us do that.
I thank you for being here also and for coming, and it's cool to get a chance to do a photo walk with you because I think that's the way you learn most. By seeing how other people do. I've made a lot of photo walks with past guests of this podcast for people listening in English and never listening in French. It's like episode 100, so I've made a few. I always try to go out with people to make photos, and when you see them working, it's one thing to hear how they do, and it's another thing to see how they do. And I'm really impatient to see how you do and how old the people, because I think we're going to be 50 on the photo walk.
You know, there's over 50 signed up, but we typically get a bit of attrition, and also it looks like it might rain on Saturday, so that's the great equalizer.
Welcome
we'll see.
To Paris.
Fingers are crossed.
You know, Paris, it's like 3 seasons are cold and rainy, and the other one is winter.
That's great. I love coming here in the winter, and I love the cold and rain. And where I live, it's cold in the winter, but always sunny. And so it's nice here. Yesterday afternoon, the light was incredible, very moody. And as long as it's not pouring and I'm not soaked and wet,
It's okay.
And cold, yeah.
So you're enjoying your stay in Paris.
Love it,
so far.
always.
Cool. It's a nice place to be. You don't know the episodes and the structure of the episode, but the first question is elevator pitch. So you're meeting Steve Jobs in an elevator, and he was known for cornering people in the elevator and saying, "Who are you? What do you do?" and firing them if the answer was bad. So you've got 3 floors to tell him who you are and what you do. What do you say?
Well, I would say that I'm a reformed photographer that now works as creative evangelist for Blurb. And that's basically my entire life. I do a lot of other things outside of that, but that's really it, is I spent the bulk of my life as a photographer. I still do photography, but it's a smaller part of a larger conversation that I'm having now. So my life is a lot more diverse. The backbone is photography, but the overall shell would be trying to live a creative life.
I've noted that you're a photographer from the analog era, which is pretty different than a photographer from the digital era.
For sure, yeah. It was. I'm very, very thankful that I started in analog photography because it taught me a lot of things that I don't think I would have learned had I started today. But there was an agonizing aspect of it as well, because it was like a glacial pace of everything that you did was tied to going back in the wet darkroom. And that, in some ways, was a limiting factor because it would begin to creep into how you made things in the field, knowing that you were then going to have to go spend a day or a half a day or multiple days in the darkroom trying to make sense of that with the analog chemical wet darkroom process. And there's a lot more freedom today, but I'm glad that I started with 1 foot in the Stone Age, and now I have 1 foot in the Space Age.
I'm not exactly okay with the fact that you don't have to post-treatment to get to the post-treatment phase in Lightroom, because today, if you're doing wedding and you're considering awards, you spend as much time in Lightroom as you spent in the darkroom. Only the name changed.
Yes, and I was going to say, and you're not sitting in a room full of chemicals.
Yes,
so it is.
That's way better.
Yes,
you're just sitting in front of the camera, so instead of destroying your lungs, you're just destroying your eyes.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of romance surrounding what people perceived the analog era to be, but when you were in the middle of it, there were plenty of people that when digital came, they were like, finally, I don't have to go live my life in the dark anymore.
It's like the Leica M6 that everybody thinks was the greatest camera of all time in the 90s. And in fact, it's only the greatest cameras of the 90s, but today.
Exactly.
So, people are thinking that it was like that, but it's not actually. I've noted, so you're a YouTuber, that's how I know you. You're also a podcaster, not regular enough for me because I love your podcast. You talk a lot about a lot of things, which I think is interesting because probably it's what makes you a good photographer also. It's that you have views on everything.
Sorry to interrupt, but you know who that was that just walked by? Roger Ballin. Roger Ballin is that dude right there is a legend in photography, but we can talk about him later. But he's a very unique dude.
So I was saying your podcast is about many things, not only photography, even YouTube. You speak about bikes, you speak about politics, you speak about everything that comes to mind. You have this goat of the week, the hero of the week.
Yeah.
You have opinions, and I was wondering. Fuck.
Classic. That is hilarious.
This is the problem. So this is the first time I'm recording outside, which shows a very nice spot close to the Eiffel Tower, and we have people passing by, and there's a little car.
There's a maintenance guy
that's making a lot of noise and parking just across us. Okay, please leave. Let's do that again. Okay, so I stuttered on my words anyway. So you have this podcast where you have a lot of opinions on many things that are not necessarily photography. You can talk as much as a bike you just got, as politics, as what happened in the world, as anything. I like I'm one person with one opinion because not everybody is able to have a quiet conversation about things that can be a little complicated. So do you think this is one of the things that makes you a good photographer, is that you have other interests than photography?
Absolutely. I think the single most important trait you can have as a photographer is curiosity.
Yeah.
And I think my life for a long, long time was just about photography. And at that time in my life, in that period in my life, it was okay. But I would never do that again. I think photography now is much better as a small part of a larger conversation. And that conversation to me is interesting. I'm interested in everything. I love politics. I love geopolitical affairs. I love history. I love science. I love space. I love all that stuff. And cycling and motorcycling and running and trail running and all that stuff. It's all part of my life, and it's interesting to me. I think it's as important as the photography itself.
Yeah, because a lot of photographers are into photography because it's cool. That's the people that don't last a long time, but they last enough to be harmful.
Yeah.
So it's a big conversation to have at some point, because after a few years in photography, if everything you have to say is just photography, are you really having something you want to talk about? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, photography has always been a private conversation, more than a public conversation,
Yeah.
and I would classify that as probably the minority view. I think a lot of photographers are in it for the accolades and acknowledgement, and I completely understand that. I don't fault that at all. But for me, it was always a private conversation.
Yeah.
And so I think now the greater conversation is as important as the photography itself.
Yeah.
And I'm less inclined to get into conversations and relationships that are based solely around photography. And having said that, all my friends are photographers,
Yeah.
so it's hard to avoid.
Also, it's the same problem for me, but it's photography is a tool in the end.
Mm-hmm.
There's one last thing for introduction. I've met one person that qualifies for this as well, which is Eric Bouvet, which maybe you know.
Oh yeah, I know of him. Yes.
Okay, so I've interviewed him, and he said something that I think applies to you too. He said, "I'm one of those guys with an unlimited amount of energy." And I think, and when I saw you in person, I feel the same thing. It's that you have some kind of unlimited amount of energy, and you go for it every time, and you just run to what you want to do.
Well, it's interesting. Eric Bouvet was a guy that I have never met. We have mutual friends in common, and he was somebody that I watched a lot when I was coming up as a photographer.
Yeah.
I think my energy level is probably, now I'm 54, I've had some health issues. Physically, it's not what it once was, but I think the problem, I'm using quotes around that, the problem that I have is that my brain never shuts off. So my brain looks around and says, look at these things that you should be doing.
Yeah.
You should do that. You should do that. And it forces my physical self to actually get out and do it. But yeah, I think I have, again, I think that it's based around curiosity. I'm so curious about everything that I want to investigate, and that gets me out in the world to do it.
You're kind of guilting yourself into doing the things.
That's it. There's definitely there's a shadow of guilt on everything I do.
There's a lot of power in guilt. I heard a podcast recently. It was Derek Sivers who said, "Fear is energy, so you should use it."
And the cliche is fear is a great motivator.
Yeah.
And I think that's very, very true. And I think it's trying to just keep it as a healthy fear and not a nervous fear.
But energy is energy. Everything is energy in the end, and you just choose what you. Anger is energy. Fear is energy. You can use anger to do very bad things or to do very good things. It's just you that decides. The interview part starts with always the 4 same questions. What book would you give the photographer, and why?
The book that I would give is the one that I stumbled upon accidentally in around 1990 at Half Price Books in Austin, Texas, when I was studying photojournalism. And I went to the Half Price bookstore and I went to the photography section, and there was a book called Telex Iran by a photographer named Gilles Perez, who's a Magnum photographer. And I had been in the photojournalism program for several years, and the photojournalism program was very structured. There were lots of rules. It was very kind of historical. And I had never seen anyone like Gilles Perez. I'd never seen composition like that, the complexity, the layering, even sort of the tilt to some of the images. But also there was an honesty in that book, because the telex messages from him in the field in Iran back to the Magnum office in Paris, there was a vulnerability to those that made me realize that even though he was this legendary figure, he had the same issues that I did in some weird way. And I didn't buy the book because it did such a number on my head because I'd never seen images like that. I didn't really quite understand those images. And then also the vulnerability aspect of it made me nervous, and I didn't buy it. I put it back on the shelf and I bought another book. But that Telex Iran just haunted me, and I could never get it out of my head. And I ended up with a copy of it 30 years later. And I was able to meet him in New York sort of accidentally one day. And he was kind enough to take me to his studio. We had lunch together. He showed me kind of what he was working on at the time, kind of one of the highlights of my photography career. But Telex Iran was a comprehensive documentary project about someone from one culture in another very different culture in a time of turmoil. And he was making sense of it photographically. And I was like, that's what I want to do with my life.
Okay. Good answer. On the same style, I've just recently read a comic book called The Photographer. It's called Le Photographe in French. It's a French photographer going to Afghanistan who made 4,000 pictures. And he came back, and 6 were published over the years. It was in 1986, so 6 published pictures for 3 months in the war in Afghanistan. And he made a comic book with the pictures. So it's his story in comics, and then the pictures in the middle. It's the same kind of. I will check if it exists in English. I will tell you, because it's an amazing one.
Okay.
The next question I stole from you. What is creativity?
This is a hard question. I think creativity to me is based in the concept of freedom. It's about the freedom to see the world in a way that's unique to you, and being able to live your life according to how you see it. And I think one of the challenges is determining what your own thoughts are. And I think creativity is just an absolute freedom to see and live the life that you want to live, sharing the stories that you want to in your own voice. And I think creativity is something, I think everybody has it, but it's a lot of people, I can only speak to being in the United States, but oftentimes as a kid, it's taught out of you in America. Don't daydream, don't doodle.
It's the same in France.
And I think there's a lot of people that you run into that say, well, I can't do what you do, I'm not creative. And that's just not true. Everybody has it, and it comes out in a variety of different flavors and shapes and looks. And it's all equal and it's all the same, but it's understanding what your unique creative fingerprint is.
And it's a long walk.
It is. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
This is what I'm realizing right now. It's that you have to try and a lot of error, and then you may start to find something that you like.
Yep.
What makes you click on the shutter?
It starts with light timing and composition. It's typically being in a place where I would call it a target-rich environment. It's a situation that could depend on the spacing of elements within a frame. Like, for example, yesterday afternoon around the Eiffel Tower in the area, lots of people doing lots of different things. It's my kind of spacing. But yesterday, what really sparked me was the light in the afternoon. By 3:30, the light was incredible. The sky was incredible. So it's most often just a light study, and then when I find the light that I want to work in, it's just go for it.
What makes a good picture?
I think a good picture is anything that invokes an emotional response in the viewer. And what's good to me may not be good for you. It varies, obviously, but I think it's anything that invokes an emotional response, and that could be love, it could be hate, it could be indifference.
So what you're saying is you cannot please everybody. And you should not try to please everybody.
I can't even please my own family. How am I going to please everybody else? No, I think it's impossible.
I have 4 main questions that go around many branches. The first one is about storytelling. You are a great storyteller. You're making even puke story fun. I heard a few ones. Yes. When a podcast or YouTube starts with "I have a great puke story," I know I will listen to till the end, because it's always very fun. You have a way of making it like we were there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's hilarious. Good to know. I love puke stories.
I feel like I know the people that lived the story, and I want to hug them at the end because it's complicated for them. So you understand that another car is passing. So you're a great storyteller, and to me, it's more important than technique and than skill. Yesterday, I was making a presentation, and I said something like technique is 10% of the picture. And there's a girl, it was an amateur photographer group, so she raised her hand and she said, how is technique only 10%? And I said, if your photo is beautiful, it's a good light, good composition, and no moment, it's like dating an amazing girl that looks beautiful, that is very well dressed, but she only speaks Russian, and you don't. And then she understood.
Yeah.
I lost my train of thought because
technique. Put it this way: I went to 4 years of photojournalism school, and we studied technique for about 2 weeks. 2 weeks was darkroom, was how to process your film, was how the camera operated, the direction of light, and that was it. And then you spent the rest of your 4 years going in the field and making pictures. Yeah. So technique, I think, is something that is mired in the prosumer world, where there's a misunderstanding of the relevance of technique. And technique obviously it's an integral part of every single picture you make, but once you establish what it is, you'd never have to think about it again. Then all you have to think about is light and timing and composition.
The problem with technique is that it's what sells, because if it's always about the story, why do you need to change your camera?
Well, that's it. I mean, I think 80% of the traffic about photography is about equipment and technique, and maybe 20%, if I'm being generous, is about the actual story. I mean, if I do a film about a photograph, it gets a fraction of the traffic than if I even mention a camera that I'm using. And that's prosumer consumer. Whereas at a place like Paris Photo, if you go to a photo show like this, there's virtually no discussion of technique whatsoever. It's about the work itself.
So when you're good at storytelling, it's not a matter of medium. You can do photo, you can do audio, you can do video. I had the example of Casey Neistat, which is an amazing storyteller, which is not that technical in the way he creates videos, but he's a good example of that. But how do you translate the storytelling in the photography, which is the subject of the podcast? So I would like to have your view on this.
Yeah, I think anytime you go from shooting random single images to telling a story, you have to adapt your style pretty dramatically. And the thing is, if you link together 10 of your best images, those may or may not tell a story. So stories require things that I call like transitional images. It's an image where you have to assist the viewer along the passage of where you want them to go, what you want them to understand. And that often means using images that aren't aesthetically outstanding, but they're informational. And those informational images link to your best, most visual images that represent you as a photographer, but you have to have both. The 10 best images are a portfolio of your best work, but stories require much more of a well-rounded group of imagery. And it takes a while to understand how to do that. And that's why, like, I went to school for 4 years, and then I worked in newspapers for years, and I did my own projects on the side. I worked for Kodak for 4 years, and all during the time I worked for Kodak, I was doing long-term projects on the side. And you realize by making prints and putting them in front of an audience that you see immediately where those holes are, where audiences get lost and say, I don't really know exactly what this story is, and you have to help them out. And again, it's practice. This is all a very, very slow process, and that's why people spend years on documentary projects, is to try to make sure that those holes are filled in.
So a story is not a single picture. It's much harder.
It depends. If it's a spot news image, I mean, if you take for example the archive of the Time Life archive, and you look at images, for example, Eddie Adams' image from South Vietnam of the execution of the South Vietnamese prisoner, or Nick Ute's picture from Vietnam. That's a summation of an entire, conflict, but those are rare. And most of the time, like, I'm not really a spot news photographer. I'm not a conflict photographer. I'm telling slower stories off to the side at a very slow pace. And occasionally you'll get something that could conceivably sum up the entire story in one frame. And as a newspaper photographer, that's what you have to do on a daily basis.
Yeah.
That's why newspapers were such a good training ground. You had to go out and you had to encapsulate an entire story because the paper was typically only going to give you one frame. It's only going to have space for one image.
You have to train for that, but it's the picture that makes one story in one picture is 1 in a million.
Yeah.
Okay. There's one thing that you have in every video or podcast you make. It's culture. You can speak about a lot of things. You can insert references, pop culture, or anything in the thing you are discussing. How is it important to add to a storytelling?
The culture of where I'm photographing?
The culture of anything. You can talk about something about photography, and then you insert a reference about a movie with a photographer. You know, you had one with King Kong, where he's going with three rolls of film on a 4-week assignment.
Yeah.
And this is I like this reference. I remember this one, but I think it's a way of connecting people to your story. No.
Jeff Bridges in King Kong, 1976 or 77. Yes, Jessica Lange, and he's, stowaway on the Petrox Explorer ship, and he has like 3 rolls of film. I think what you're referencing is context.
Yeah.
It's where, and I think again, it also speaks back to what we were talking about earlier, which is photography is a small part of a larger conversation. People will come to photography for a variety of different reasons, and some of those reasons may be baffling to the photographer.
Yeah.
But whatever, because it's brought them to you as a image maker, as a creative person. So I remember Blurb, this goes back to 2007 or 2008, Blurb sent a film crew to follow me for 3 days. And we did a film. And I remember someone reached out and asked me what kind of boots I was wearing. Yeah. And I thought, what a bizarre question. But that person was then sucked into the story and the film because of a pair of boots I was wearing. And in my head, I was like, oh, I got to realize that photography means different things to different people, and not everybody is looking at it through the same lens that I am, but they may come to me for a variety of other reasons, and it doesn't really matter why they come. The most important fact is they're here.
Yeah.
And then how do we develop a relationship where this just isn't a fleeting moment, where how can I remain in contact with these people, and how else are we connected in our lives?
So you connect to people. Yes, it's a lot of crows there.
We got bird action, all kinds of stuff.
You're not whipping out your camera to photograph the birds. It's your new.
I don't have a long lens with me.
Okay. So
my binoculars are in the hotel room.
Too bad, because I know a great bridge with a lot of birds. So I will show you the way, and next time you can come back to that place. About the way you make movies, you make podcasts, it always seems to be one single take, and I'm always wondering. So you smile when I say that, so maybe it's not that much, but you seem to be at ease with what you say, and it seems to go out like easily. Does it have anything to do with the fact that you journal? Maybe your ideas are clearer because you write them, and you don't have to remember everything.
So the short answer to your question is, it is one take. I don't ever redo anything normally because I don't really have enough time to do that. Journaling is a really important part of my life, and it's been a part of my life since 1993. So I've been doing this for a long, long time. But also, I am very much an introvert in my personal life. But for whatever reason, I love public speaking.
Yeah.
Because some of my heroes in photography, early on in my life when I got a chance to go see some of my heroes speak, they were not good speakers. And they were so bad at public speaking and speaking about their work that it turned me off to their work. And I made a decision, this goes back to the late 1980s, I made a decision that if I was ever in a position, and if I ever got good enough as a photographer to be put in a position where I had to speak about my work, I would not be that person. I would not fumble through a presentation and talking about my work. And so I just made a decision that I would never be fearful of public speaking. And if I got a chance to do it, I would be as good as I possibly could be. So when YouTube came along, I'm a reluctant YouTuber. It's kind of mortifying. I don't go back and watch myself on the films. I don't listen to the films. I find it a little bit embarrassing in some ways, but it's easy for me to sit in front of the camera and speak because I'm thinking about these things a lot. And there is no separation really between my personal life and my professional life. They're wound together so tightly that these conversations that I'm having on YouTube are the same conversations I'm having in my real life with my friends and colleagues.
So you have the good way of using YouTube, which is you just put a video on there and you don't care about the algorithm and everything else, which
Don't
is
care.
why I like your videos, because you don't really care about that, and that makes it interesting, because you don't bother just making something that will work.
Yeah, I think, I'll never be a successful YouTuber because to really get good at it, you have to really live your life to the algorithm.
Yeah.
And that's not something I'm really interested in doing. And a lot of people do it really well, and that's why they're successful YouTubers. But I don't know. It wouldn't feel like me if I did that.
I've heard you say still on storytelling many times that you have more subject ideas than time to make them, which is very hard for me to hear, because I struggle to find good subjects. I've shown you a little of what I do. This is the first one I'm a little proud of. So what makes a good subject, and how do you find the good subject?
I think the only thing that really matters when it comes to good subject matter is what is of personal value and personal interest to you.
Yeah.
Because if you're not really 100% emotionally invested in telling the story, it shows in the work. And as a newspaper photographer, early on in my life, there were plenty of things that I was assigned that I wasn't interested in. And you had to force yourself to engage with it. And it made me a better photographer. And then as I began, a little bit later in my career, being able to do longer form projects that were more photo essay style work, I only wanted to work on stories that were of interest to me. So one of the best ways for me to find story ideas is reading. I do a ton of reading. I read somewhere between 50 and 100 books a year, depending on the year. And through those books, it is just an endless, the bad cliche of peeling the onion. You pick up a book, especially nonfiction stuff, and it is just one project idea after another. Secondarily, that curiosity aspect comes into play. I'm in the field a lot. I talk to every stranger that I can come in contact with. I talk to everybody. I snoop around. I read the news. I'm interested in what's happening on a local level in my state where I live. And also things like, I discovered birding a few years ago. And through birding, people assume that the photo stories that I'm doing about birding are these tight images of birds. And it's really not. It's about the culture that surrounds where these birds are. And it's just endless, the number of stories out there that are tell. And so I keep a list. And also I come up with story title ideas. And this sounds a bit weird, but I will find a phrase that I love, and then I will find a story that represents the phrase.
This is something I do also, but it's with song titles.
Song titles are good too.
It works. So you're saying you have to feel something to make people feel something.
Yeah, I mean, why would you get involved in a story that you don't care about?
Yeah.
So it's whatever that keeps you up at night. It's the first thing you think about when you wake up in the morning. That's a good place to start to find a story.
Great advice. On creativity, I told you earlier yesterday it was my first public speech ever, and I quoted you twice. I quoted two persons twice. It was you and Erica Mann. I don't know if you know her. Erica Mann, she's from Two Man Studios. They're
I don't think so.
two of the biggest wedding photographers in the world.
Oh wow, I don't know her.
So there's I have a very few sources that I learn from.
Okay.
I don't give permission to most people. So that's a lot. Having two quotes. The first quote was building a following is more important than good photography. The second quote was creativity is supposed to be creative, and yet we find ourselves in a world of creative conformity, which was very hard for me to say on stage because I was in French 1 second and in English the other one, and then I had to translate it. But I love this quote on creativity, and why I mentioned Erica Mann also is that she has another quote that I think relates to this one, which is create before you consume.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is how to be creative without redoing what other people do.
It's a great question, and I think it's a very simple answer, which is you have to fill your head with your own thoughts and not the thoughts of other people. So there's a lot of people who are, I was just speaking about this morning with someone else. When I was in college, I was making documentary projects, and I was shooting T-Max 3200 film, and I was doing long-term projects. And I went into the archive of the university, and I found an old news photographer magazine that had a story about Antonin Kretokville. And I saw his work, and I just fell in love with his work. A couple of years goes by, I'm doing projects, and I put my portfolio in front of a more established photographer, and he looks at the work and he says, wow, this looks like Antonin Kretokville. And I was nervous. It was not a compliment to me. It was nervous that I had somehow, maybe subconsciously, decided to copy Antonin Kretokville. And it was I took it as not a good thing. I think that has shifted today. There's a lot of people who are copying what they've already seen instead of taking the time to understand how they see the world and learning how to translate that with a camera. That takes time. It takes years to do that, and I understand why there's a reluctancy to do it now, because there's a lot of people want to get famous very quickly. They want to be relevant very quickly. And when I started, that was impossible. You spent 5, 10, 15 years trying to become relevant. And so I think you have to understand your own thoughts. And I think people a lot of times are afraid of what they're going to come back with when they start thinking, who am I truly, and how does that translate with the camera?
To me, copying is not that bad if you copy just the little piece that you like in a person, and you mix it with a little piece of a lot of other people, no?
Yeah, I think we're all derivative in some way, shape, or form. But for example, I looked at a body of work a few weeks ago, and I looked at it, and it to me was an obvious reference to Sally Mann. And in my head, I thought, does this photographer know Sally Mann? Because obviously this work looks very derivative, but in their artist statement, there was no reference to Sally Mann. And I took that as a negative. I said this person should have referenced the influence that Sally Mann had, which is completely fine to do work that's derivative of another artist, but mention who it is, and then mention why that you are adding to this conversation in your own way.
But maybe he doesn't know, which is why you should show your work to somebody who knows.
Definitely. You want to show your work. I mean, Paris Photo is a perfect example. You know, that crowd of people is incredibly well established and well educated and knows their photo history. And it's very different showing your work to somebody at Paris Photo than it is to show your work to somebody on YouTube.
Yeah.
That an audience on YouTube that may or may not know anything about photography.
Yeah. Mostly
Mostly
nothing.
not, yes.
Okay. The next question is about layering. So I told you you're one of the few people I'm classifying in the educator section. And my wife has a saying that roughly translates to education is saying the same thing over and over again. We have small kids, so we say a lot of the time the same thing over and over again. There's one thing you're always coming back is on layering.
Yeah.
You say a lot foreground, middle ground, background. Which is something I've been listening to you a lot because I'm eager to get better at layering. This was not my strong point, and I want to do it better. So for people who don't follow you as I do, would you mind explaining what you consider a good layering?
Yeah, I think layering is important because most of the people... The playground's coming alive.
Yeah.
Most of the people that I see walking around with cameras are walking around with wide angle to medium distance lenses. And one of the beauties of a wide angle lens is not just to take in a wide angle of view, it's to help build depth within an image.
Yeah.
And so the way you do that is to have a foreground, midground, and background all working in good light, good action happening on all those planes. And it is very difficult to do. And there are certain photographers out there, Alex Webb comes to mind, that have built their careers on doing this style of image. And it looks easy, and it is incredibly difficult. And to me, it's like, I can't remember the last time I made some really successful, what I would call like a 5-star layered image. It's very hard, but it's just an active foreground, very close to the frame, to the photographer, midground and background, all with interesting elements working in the right light, all at the same time. And it is, I would equate it very much to a good chess player.
Yeah.
Good chess player is 10, 12, 15 moves down the road, and a good good documentary photographer who works in layering is watching the pieces on the chessboard in front of them and anticipating where those pieces are going to be at a certain moment, and then being fast enough to capture it.
You can learn the rules in 5 minutes, but spend a lifetime mastering it.
That's it.
Okay, it's very difficult to find a good explanation of a good layering. Most people have part of the answer. I think you have most of what we need to know in the explanation. Thank you. So since you've been a photojournalist, I can't help but think it's part of the toolbox that you're given when you start. The things that you get yelled at if you fuck them up. Can you explain me the rules of a good photojournalist picture, which is probably the rules of a good storytelling picture?
Well, I think the rules of photojournalism and the things that you would get yelled at are based not in photography so much, even though they were very keen on, rule of thirds and don't bullseye people in the frame and that kind of thing. But the things you get yelled at were rules of journalism. So grammar, spelling, and punctuation. If you wrote a caption and had a grammar, spelling, and punctuation error, that was an immediate F. If you there was a book at the time that every photojournalism student had called the the Associated Press style book.
Yeah.
If you made a mistake that was contained in that book, it was an immediate F. And then also your journalistic ethics. If you were in the field and you set up a photograph, that was a fireable offense. If you manipulated people into doing things in a photograph, that was a fireable offense. I saw people do this again and again.
That's what I was thinking.
The weakness, the pressures of journalism were very real. This was not, at the time, this was not everybody wins a trophy environment. If you screwed up, somebody was in your face yelling at you at the end of the day. The photo editor typically was the one who made it clear that you had made a mistake. And also, it was basically, these are the things that you have to uphold as a journalist, because the faith of the newspaper is based in these ethics, and the audience, the public, needs to know, so that when you walked up with a press credential around your neck that said you worked for whatever news organization, it meant something. It meant that you were vetted and that you were maintaining journalistic ethics. That is a very slippery slope.
That had changed a lot recently.
It has changed dramatically. And again, but it was terrifying, because you went in the field. I was nervous all the time that I'm going to do something wrong, or I'm going to get if I met you in the field as a photojournalist and I photographed you and I said, okay, Julian, what's your name? Julian Pasternak. Great. I would write it down, and then I would hand you my notebook and I would say, you write it down, and then I would record you saying it so that I would have 3 backups to make sure that your name was right. Then I had to write in the caption why we were together. And if I got that wrong, I was in trouble. And so every move, and in college, every time I wrote something, I had the AP style book in my hand, looking at am I making a mistake here that's going to get an F on this project?
And you get fired if you make the mistake.
In the newspaper, you can get fired. And I know plenty of photographers who did things they shouldn't have done that got fired. And in journalism school, you'd work for weeks on a project and get an F because you spelled something wrong, or you did a grammar mistake. It was terrifying.
You learned not to make a small mistake.
You did. You learned, and the downside of it was constricting. You couldn't be as expressive as you wanted, because you knew that if you strayed outside the lines, you were going to get penalized.
Okay, so in the end, it was eye-opening on the fact that you cannot say all the time what you want.
Ooh, no, it was journalism was very formulaic, and it was very controlling. And, even how you wrote, and I remember this very, very distinctly. I did a story about what we call in the U.S. a soup kitchen. It was for less fortunate folks who didn't have enough food, and they would go to these places and get free food. And I did the story, and I came back, and my journalism instructor said, content-wise, you're fantastic. He said, grammar, spelling, and punctuation, you're a train wreck. And he said, but that's why we have editors. That's why when you're working at a newspaper and you write something, it's not going directly to press.
Yeah.
It goes through the photo editor, and then it goes through the assistant managing editor, and then it goes through a copy editor. And, we're here as a safety net. The key for you is your content is good, but you need to refine the rest of it.
But it's a good lesson. If we talk about books, which is your job now, you work at Blurb, you're creative evangelist. For them, what does that? What is that title? What does it mean?
Creative evangelist means I get to go to Paris.
Oh, cool! I want the same job. I live in Paris, so maybe I get to go somewhere else.
You get to go to New Mexico. Yeah, my job has changed many times over the years, but my current title is evangelist, and basically what it is it's a liaison between the company and the professional creative industry. Okay. So, photography, design, illustration, art, education. I'm sort of a go-between between those two things. And then I do some writing for them. I do a lot of the public speaking. I do the educational outreach. I do some filmmaking, and I'm one piece of a much bigger marketing team.
Okay, and what you do on the side is, do you consider this a part of what you do, or is it an extension for you? And how does it work together?
Well, I would say the bulk of what I do is actually done on my own, but it still ties to Blurb because, as I mentioned before, there's really no separation between my personal and private life, or my personal life and my professional life, because all of my friends, my wife included, everybody's in this industry. So either photography or printing or publishing. It's hard for me to escape any of that. But the YouTube was not something that Blurb asked me to do. My shifter site was not something that Blurb asked me to do. So I have a specific set of duties that I have for Blurb, and then everything else is on my own, but it all still ties back.
It's always because most of what you say is make books.
Print.
Also print.
Yeah. Print. Put your work in print.
A lot, which is what I'm trying to do right now because of you. What is so important about printing your work as a photographer?
Oh, it's simple. Printing forces you to make decisions about your work because you have to pay for what you're doing. Whether you're making a small 4x6 print or you're making a book, you have to pay for it. And that in itself right there changes the playing field. Because if you're going to make a book, let's say that you shoot 1,000 images. Well, you're not going to put 1,000 images in the book. At most, maybe, if you did an incredible job, you'd have 50. So editing from 1,000 to 50. But more likely, you might have 25. And then you need to determine what the top 10 are, and then what's the single best image, and then what's the single best image that goes on the cover that will help you tell the story, or that will just trick people into opening the book. Those decisions that forces critical thought that makes you a better photographer.
This is funny what you're saying, because yesterday I had to present my work, and I made the selection of the Pine Tree series, and I showed the 12 pictures I have selected. And I've been doing photography professionally for 12 years, but it's the first time I felt pro, really. I understood what it meant to have chosen the 12 pictures out of the 400 I made, which became 50 I printed, which became 12 as a series.
That's it. I think if you look at the classic photo book, The Americans by Robert Frank, I'm going to get this math wrong, but I think he shot 72,000 images for that project, and there's 51 in the book. That's called editing.
Yeah.
And that's what printing forces you to do, is it forces that a critical thought.
It's not 71,000 double clicks. It's
No, and it's terrifying to a lot of, especially with like consumer, prosumer photographers who didn't come up with a photo editor behind them all day long. I would come back from an assignment, there was a photo editor there. And that's all they did. And they would help you make sense of your work. And a lot of people are not fortunate. They don't have that ability. So, editing is a terrifying thing. And they'll shoot 1,000 pictures and they'll edit to 500 and say, okay, I did my edit. And I'm like, that's not an edit. You haven't started. What are the top 10? And they go, oh, that's impossible. And I'm like, no, it's not impossible. It's just editing.
Yeah. The clicking is easy. The choosing is very hard.
Oh, it's an art form.
Yeah. This is I think it's the first time I understood that you're a real photographer when you know to kill some pictures.
I think I love this analogy, and speaking of culture, it's another movie reference. It's a movie called Almost Famous by Cameron Crowe, and Philip Seymour Hoffman plays a really unique character, and he's talking to a young journalist, and his line is, "You have to be merciless. These people are not your friends." And I think when these people could be translated to your photographs. Your photographs are not necessarily your friends. You have to be merciless. What's good and what's not.
Very, very good analogy. How do you print well?
Well, that's a tricky question because, a darkroom printing is a language, and there are master printers, and I never reached master printer status. I never will. I was decent. Not great. Inkjet printing is very different. It's much easier. But here's the thing. I have a horrible printer in my office. It's a Canon all-in-one scanner thermal printer, and it only prints in black and white, and it's horrible. There's lines all over. All the images are banded. I love it. I stick them in my journal. The ink comes off in my hands. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to work for whatever it is that you're using. So my journal, I'm not looking for beautiful prints. I'm looking for things that I can then put other art materials over the top of. I love having the ink on my fingers at the end of the day.
You work with it.
Yeah, you work with it. It's whatever gets you to press that print button is the key.
The books are the reason you're in Paris today. It's Paris Photo. It's like a giant book fair. You told me about when we prepared for the photo walk. You told me I'm gonna be there. You told me about event I didn't even know existed, and I'm discovering that it's a huge world.
Yes.
That I'm supposed to be a professional photographer, and I don't know about.
Well, I think that's a very interesting question, and I'm actually glad you brought that up, because I think, and I've mentioned this many times on YouTube, there's an online photography world, and then there's the industry of photography. And this is the industry of not just photography, but more specifically of fine art photography. Even though there are photojournalism installations, I went to an opening last night. Michael Robinson Chavez from the Washington Post had an image in a show, and he's a friend from way back. This is primarily more fine art photography, but it is the galleries and the curators and the collectors and the publishers and the major photographers in the world who are operating in this space. And I think that a lot of the folks who live in the online world have no idea this world exists, but it is where the best work is coming from.
It's the world of the initiated?
It's the world of, I would classify it. There's a lot of fortunate people in this space who either went to photography school or went to art school and had the luxury of having the time to study what's been done before, and also how their work fits in, understand the context, but also the time and the ability to make this kind of work, which is not easy, and to get assignments and to get publishing deals and find gallery representation and how to get in museums and work with curators and collectors. It is a conversation that I wish more online people knew about, because it would make them better photographers just knowing this exists.
It's the 1%. So you're not getting in easily.
No,
but if you know it exists, it gives you something to aim for. Yeah,
I mean, I think you can look at it two ways. You can look at it and say, oh, I wasn't lucky, I never got a chance to do that, I'm never going to get in. And that's not true.
Yeah.
Or you can look at it and say, wow, there is a lot to learn here. And the thing is, there's a lot about this part of the photography world I don't like. There's a lot of people here that I would not want to hang out with.
Yeah.
But there's an unbelievable amount of good work here, and also good books. And each of those, just to get a book published, that's 18 months to 2 years of your life, not to mention making the work and making the connection to the publisher and getting someone to say, yes, we're going to invest all this money in doing this, and getting a printer in Italy or Iceland or China to put this, it's like getting married. It's a huge relationship that isn't just about the photography. And so the amount of what an onliner could learn at an event like this is endless. We were joking that if you have FOMO, if you have fear of missing out, this is a terrible place to be, because there's so much here you can't possibly get to it all. But it's the industry side of photography, and that's the side that I spent my career in. And now I'm dabbling in the online side and realizing the gap between these two is a pretty sizable gap.
Yeah. But in the end, it's not all about the photography.
No, I mean, being part of this world is about who you know. It's about your contacts. It's about how you look. It's about how you dress. It's about how you speak. It's about how you speak about your work. It's about your knowledge of photo history. It's about understanding context. All of those things. To me, it's the relevancy. Yes, the photography is important, but everything else is on equal playing field.
It sounds like politics.
A little bit, very political. You have a lot of people who are like photographers who are turned off by this. And I think if you fight it, you're never going to be happy. Yeah. You have to understand that in some ways it's a bit of a game, and there are people that play the game really well. And the people that I find most intriguing are the ones who can play the game without losing a track of who they are. And I love looking at immediately recognizable work. I love going into a gallery and looking on the wall and without seeing the caption saying, I know who did that. That's, to me, the sign of a good photographer, is that immediately recognizable work. When I saw that Gilles Perez work, for instance, I was like, I've never seen anybody that works like that before. And Paris Photo, there's 100 photographers in there who make work that I can look at across the room and say, I know who did that. Yeah.
So it's a good place to be for you.
Oh, yeah.
Last question of the interview. We always end up talking about one picture or one series of picture in particular. In your case, it's double exposures, which seems to be what you love doing at the moment. You talk a lot about that. I understand one double exposure. It's harder for me to understand full projects on double exposures. So why are you choosing this as a medium of expression, and how do you make them relevant?
Great question. So I think this is really important, especially for people who struggle with how to come up with a story idea. I had never done double exposures until 2019 when I went to Albania for the first time. And I went to Albania to take a workshop, not to teach it, but to take it. I've been back twice since to teach workshops in Albania, but I went to take a workshop with Elena Dorfman, who's a fine art photographer from LA, who's Albanian descent. And Elena said, you should really come here and see this place before it changes. And so I made a decision to go, and she was teaching a workshop, and so I went. And before I left, I did research on Albania, and I needed to know more because, like many Americans, we don't know that much about the country. And I said, I need to develop a way of telling this story, and it needs to be specific to Albania. And my original idea was, I will use multiple exposures. I'll have one exposure to represent the old dictatorship of Albania and then the new sort of burgeoning modern democracy. And I got to Tirana the first morning, and I thought the technique that I was going to use, it didn't work. And I kind of panicked, and I thought, okay, what do I got to do? And I sort of invented a new way of doing it. And so I had a specific reason for shooting multiple exposures, was the old Albania versus the new Albania.
Okay.
At the same time, to me, it is a gimmick. Multiple exposures are in a way a gimmick. They're a lot easier than shooting standalone images. I've continued shooting them wherever I've been, although this trip to Paris is the first time that I'm not shooting them. I've just said before I left, I'm not doing these anymore right now.
You're doing black and white.
Shooting black and white and shooting just straight images because it's more challenging. The doubles, you can do anything. But I think when you have a specific reason for doing it, it makes sense. If you're just doing it all the time for no reason at all, then it becomes too much of a gimmick for me.
Nice answer. We are arriving to the end of the episode. I have two more questions. What is the worst moment in your photographic career?
This is pretty funny. The worst moment in my photography career was also one of the best moments because it forced me to make a change. But I had become, at some point in my career, I'd left journalism. I'd done all kinds of other kinds of photography. I worked for Kodak for 4 years. I decided to leave Kodak, and I became a wedding photographer. This was before the wedding industry blew up. It was sort of still off to the side and like a weird business. And I was shooting high-end weddings out of Los Angeles. And at one point in time, I'd been shooting on a wedding for like 8 or 10 hours. I was exhausted. It was in the middle of the California desert. It was 110 degrees. I was packing up my gear at the end of the night. And the wedding planner comes running out and says, no, you can't pack up yet. You forgot to photograph the cupcakes. There was some high-end cupcake company that was, the bride and groom had paid for these, overpriced cupcakes. And in my head, I thought, I have a degree in photojournalism. I've had images in Life magazine. I've done all these things, and I am getting yelled at for not photographing a cupcake.
Yeah.
I was like, I've hit rock bottom. And literally, the reason why that was horrible, because as I just described, the reason why it was great was I went home, and within a week, I had quit photography.
Yeah.
I just deleted my email account, and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to do photography, but I'm not going to work as a photographer. And that was it. That was the moment. My wife still makes fun of me because she was standing right there and saw the whole thing.
And so is this the best moment, or do you have another best moment in your career?
I've had so many good moments. I would never be able to narrow it down to one. Photography has afforded me a life that is, I'm incredibly fortunate. I've had so many experiences. An older photographer pulled me aside when I first was had an internship at the newspaper. He said, you're going to live in 1 year what the average person lives in 10. And I think that's an understatement. I think it's even more than that. Photography has put me in places and with people that I would have certainly never been exposed to before. I'm in Paris doing an interview with you right now. Yeah. I get to spend another 3 or 4 days here going around to different events. My whole life is a good moment because of photography.
So it brings you a lot. I think what it brings is encounters. No?
Constant.
All the time. You make friends all the time, from crazy far away people to a corner of the street, or you just get to talk to somebody you met on the street and take his picture.
That's it.
It brings great encounters.
It's given me an amazing life.
It's cool. Thank you for this encounter. We were almost killed by pigeons.
Pigeons
right,
and a parrot behind you on the tree, or a macaw or something.
This is why we didn't sit. We were in a park. We didn't sit under a tree because I knew what would happen. You're not from Paris. You don't know how aggressive they are. But the pigeons hate me. I can tell.
Good.
Thank you, Daniel. It was amazing having you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was a blast talking with you.
Enjoy Paris photo, and we'll see you on Saturday for the photo walk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci d'avoir écouté cet épisode. N'oubliez pas de laisser une note et un commentaire sur Apple Podcast et Spotify. C'est important et ça nous aide à nous développer. Vous pouvez également aller sur le blog Dans l'œil du photographe à l'adresse www.tlodp.fr. C'est tout pour aujourd'hui. On se retrouve au prochain épisode dans l'œil d'un nouveau photographe.
Dans l'œil du photographe, merci, c'est fini.
Sunday Night Production.